Welcome back to another video. Voila! This is Oni, and today we're going to talk about the emotional journey of a career writer. So, last video we talked about all the different stages as a writer we go through in terms of our business sense, but now we're going to talk about the life mechanics, some of the emotional things that are going to happen to us, because a lot of people have this misunderstanding that writing is this intellectual or even a business proposition or something other than an emotional journey, whereas anyone who's actually done it, who stepped into it, if you're in the ring, you know very well so much of writing and the difficulties with it are absolutely about the emotions at play, what that looks like, how it shows up in our lives. No, I'm going to talk about a lot of the things I've commonly seen with many of the clients I've had, as well as in my own journey, how we can navigate them so you can move on to the next stage and advance your career journey. So there's a couple things we need to get familiar with. And at the beginning here, we're going to talk about the Hawkins scale of emotion, which we do use for character development, but we're going to talk about it specifically in your development right now. So if you see here at the bottom of the scale, we have shame at the very bottom, and at the very top we have enlightenment. What this scale represents, it was written by Dr. David Hawkins, and essentially it's a measurement of the emotional vibration, because everything is made of sound and energy in the universe, and everything is connected. And this actually did pass scientific efficacy, so it has passed like scientific backing, and there's many journals on it. You can learn more about it in the book Power versus Force. I use this a lot in a lot of my teaching because it's a very, very clear understanding to help us understand in terms of our development, as well as how we process story and human beings think. What is it we are actually feeling when we experience each of these emotions and what that can look like? Because if we can get down to understanding the emotion first and foremost, what that then helps us define is the thinking. And then once we understand the thinking, we can then finally then understand the results of the matter. Because oftentimes when we have any type of interaction or we're living in our lives, we'll be thinking, man, I don't understand why that happened. Why did this person act like this? Or why did I move like that? But that's because we're trying to think logically. I think especially there are some people we would say they're illogical in their thinking. But if we understand what the underlying emotion is, we can understand how that trail of emotion then can affect the psychology. And this makes for very resonant psychology, as well as resonant understanding in our writing. So if we understand how this scale works in our writing, we can then write very believable characters. But today I'm going to talk about how we use this in a very practical sense for you in your emotional journey. So starting at the bottom, most people are coming from a place of shame because we come from a shame culture. We come from a culture of shame. And you got to understand, in these lower halves down here, this is called suffering. And to characterize suffering, the best way is about energy expenditure. So when you're suffering, basically it costs more energy to be positive than it costs to be negative. If you find that oftentimes to do the things you want to do or to live as you desire, it costs energy and it's difficult, you are experiencing emotions of suffering. Now, it's not to say that suffering is bad and wrong, and you're going to see that's actually quite necessary to experience these emotions in our journey. But human beings overall, about 80% of people, I would say, give or take, experience emotions of suffering most of the time. So you're not evil, you're not wrong, there's nothing wrong with you if you're experiencing this. But you have to recognize as we rise up the scale, our capacity to manage our energy increases. So once we get to here where we are getting by, I would say about 18% of people experience this. And getting by emotions is where we battle and we have a lot of resistance towards what we want, but we're still able to function. So that means that you're able to do what you want, but this is where things like discipline, diligence, really making a determined effort, this is what I like to call the hero stage, right? So in the middle is the hero stage, and at the bottom here in the suffering, we call this the victim stage. And we're all sort of victims or dependent on people when we're younger. But then as we move and advance higher and we move into our hero stage, we obviously become more able to resist and move towards freedom. And then once we get here into our highest, it's freedom. And this is where we have an aversion. So we're absolutely repelled by things that aren't good for us. When you're in the freedom stage and you are a creator, that is where it costs more energy to be negative, meaning that being negative is it's easier to be positive than it is to be negative. It's just way easier to be positive than to be negative. And if you find that, well, I'm just way easier to be positive. And I'm not talking about toxic positivity where you're just always forcing it and there's this level of force trying to make yourself positive. That actually is coming from a sense of neglect here, which is usually vibrating somewhere in neutrality or pride, right? Something in there because we're still trapped by our ego. But when you're in the creator phase, it literally just means that you're not focused on things that make you angry or upset. It doesn't mean you don't feel these emotions, but it means that you're not overwhelmed by them. And it's just naturally easier to be positive. The best way to explain this is that if you sit alone by yourself and you notice your thoughts, if you've noticed that you start getting bored, you're probably somewhere in here. If you notice that you start feeling tired, you're probably closer up here. If you start feeling super, super energized, you're up here. So actually, let me just be clear. So if you feel tired, you're probably down here. If you feel bored, you're probably around here. And if you feel energized, like you just have to make something, you're up here. That's the best way to know where you're at. So just spend some time alone in 10 minutes and pay attention to where you are. If you find that you start overthinking, start feeling anxious, or you're just really amused with yourself, that'll tell you where you're at. So if you're bored, here. Tired, here. Energized, excited, up here. Typically. Now, understanding this emotional journey, if you want to move all the way from an aspirant to an established pro, you're going to have to go through all of this. So now we're going to talk about what that journey looks like as you move through each of the stages. Sweet. So now we're going to talk about what each of these things you're going to experience and what some of the common emotional experiences, now that you understand what the emotions actually are. So as an aspirant, you're going to usually be starting out in your hero's journey. You're going to be coming down from 1 to 4, right? So you're starting from the ordinary world going down to meeting the mentor, right? That is usually the stage you're at when you're starting out as an aspirant in your hero's journey. Also, by the way, the hero's journey is totally connected to the Hawkins scale. If you want to learn more about that, look out for my school group and check out more of my lessons and courses on how I teach the connection between our emotional journey, the hero's journey, and how psychology and story all run together. It's pretty cool. If you like that, just follow, and subscribe, and you'll see more stuff on that. But speaking specifically about the aspirant, in that first part of the hero's journey, you're going to be having lots of excitement. You're going to be really working things out. And the idea is typically you're coming from a place of freedom and joy. That's where a lot of your focus is mentally and emotionally, right? If you're not there, it's going to be very hard to be in the creator space, right? And so the idea is we want to now be able to take this journey where we're able to move through all these difficult emotions, because that's what you're setting out on. And most people don't know that. What you're doing when you're saying, I want to be a creator, you're going to dip down into all these really, really, really nice, fun emotions like shame, guilt, pride, desire, anger, rejection, betrayal, all these super fun emotions. And you're going to learn how to build that into a nice, pretty little package for your creation's sake. This usually is centered in the emotion of love, because love is actually the combination of positive emotions and negative emotions, right? And really coming in together, but creating a positive spin on it, because this is where we need a shift in mindset. But to talk about this, we need to understand at the top level here, this is mostly spirit or just the nature of your character. Here is, like you said, your thinking, and then result is based in physical reality, right? And you have to be able to transcend each of those stages as you work through your journey. But you're not going to know that as an aspirant. You're just going to be, I want to write a book. I'm going to write a book. And then as you start writing a book, unless you're super, super duper talented, you're probably going to suck. And like most people, you're going to suck. And then as you suck, you're going to naturally feel a level of shame, because we live in a culture of shame. If you're fortunate that you don't live in a place, or you're in a place that protects you from that, super lucky. That's not very common. Most people deal with intense shame and a sense of identity as they become an aspirant. And so this is where you're going to have community, you're going to find other writers, and because you suck and you realize, hey, I'm terrible, I'm going to try and learn, because that's the natural step. So this is where we go to meet the mentor, stage 4, where we go from the call to adventure, refusal of the call, down to meeting the mentor. And now we're going in and being an aspirant writer. This is our first stage. Now, once you've gone and you've actually finished a project and you go, you put it out there, you will see that as an aspirant writer, you still suck. Even though you learned and you did everything you can, you're going to still suck. But now, because you're going to go on this journey of learning, you're going to make the leap 80% of people don't do. And now you're going to go through your hero's journey of writing this, and now you're going to go deep into the down, dirty, icky emotions of the isolated artist. And this is where most people's dreams go to die. Because now you are under the understanding that you suck, but now you have the understanding of you know why you suck. Because before you thought you didn't know why you sucked. But as an aspirant and as an isolated artist, you're going to see very well that you suck. And you're going to learn why you suck, because you're going to learn, oh, I don't know how to write characters. I don't know how to plot a novel. I don't know how to build a scene. And then you're going to learn how to do all these things. And this is going to be a very isolating experience the more and more you do it, because as you begin to stretch and expand yourself, there's going to be less and less people who will understand your journey. Because most people, frankly, aren't learning the level of craft at anything, much less writing, to be able to put something like that together. They're just not working on it. Most people are just doing things because they're getting a job, they're going to school because they're trying to pay the bills. But once you get to this point, you're really focused on building up your sense of the craft. And so because of that, you're going through a lot of these emotions, and you are going to hit shame. If you're not hitting shame, I would really argue and wonder if you've gone through this stage and how good you are. And maybe you were able to shortcut that, but almost always you're going to feel sense of shame, guilt, apathy, and then you're going to hit things like desire. You're going to feel fear. You're going to feel anger. Because a lot of what's going to happen as you become the isolated artist is you're going to lose people as you begin feeling these negative emotions. Because most people don't want to feel these negative emotions. Most people avoid that, which is why they don't do it, which is why they don't finish a project, which is why they don't actually ever move out of it. And even if they do finish a project, they never put it out there. They never really try to make it better and advance and go to the next stage as the emergent professional, because they're too overcome with these emotions. So this is where you go through stage 5 of crossing the threshold, and then you go to test allies and enemies, where you start seeing what's real, who's what's not. And then like stage 6, where you're testing everything, you start being isolated and you will lose everything. So if you notice that, oh, when I started writing and I started taking it seriously, I lost a lot of my friends and a bunch of people left me, yeah, that's good. That's exactly what's going to happen. And if you're fortunate enough that that's not the case, you're in good company. But most of the time, you're going to have to move on from your writers group, because most of them you're not going to be able to go from with. And in order to step into this next part of the emergent professional, you are now going to have to find a new community. So this is where now you're going to go into the ordeal, right? And the reason it's an ordeal is because even though things are going to get better, it is uphill. It is a tremendous amount of effort at this point. You are going to be putting a lot of effort and focus and sacrifice. So when you're in the emergent professional, at this point, you know you want to be a writer. Once you get to here, only about 1% of people get this far. I would say about 10% of people. Only about 10% of people who want to be a writer get this far, where maybe they've made a few bucks off of writing. People have told them their writing's good. They're like, hey, you could be a professional. You should really do this. But now they have to learn the ins and outs of publishing. And so you're going to be climbing up, and you're going to be working through desire, anger, and you're going to get stuck on pride. Maybe you won't. Maybe you're humble. Maybe you'll be able to really just be able to mellow it out. But a lot of writers, they never move past this stage and into the emerging professional because they're not courageous enough to get over their pride. So they never move into the reward and start gathering the elixir, which, as you guys know. So here at the bottom, we have the ordeal of the hero's journey. This is my sort of pseudo graph of it. And then at this left side here, on stage 9, we have the reward. And the reward is then having a path open up for you. It doesn't necessarily mean getting your publishing deal or anything like that, but it now means you're about to retrieve the elixir or the opportunities to become a proper professional, because now you understand what is needed. But to do that, you have to move through the pride and knowing that no matter how good at writing you think you are, your editor's probably going to know better. Your beta readers are going to know things that you don't, and you're going to have to need other people. A lot of writers get stuck on pride. Don't get stuck on pride. Be courageous, move forward, listen to other people, be open, be willing to accept help, be reasonable, and willing to step and understand facets of the publishing industry you don't. One of the biggest issues I see nowadays is writers are so resistant to others' help, and they never get through because they're just stuck on this idea of, I know how to write and I'm so good and I can't be anything more than this artist. And they get stuck in these mindsets that are all just coming down to pride. They're just not willing to let go of the emotion of pride. And so because they're so prideful, they never get through that. But once you become the professional, now you have to learn to love it again. And if you're like, how do I learn to love it? Love the process. Because now at this place, you have to learn how to love writing again, because you don't suck anymore. You're actually good now. You learned how to write. Some people are like, hey, I paid you a little bit. You learn how to publish. You learn how to do something. But now you have to learn to love that entire publish. Writing, going through an editor, picking out a book cover, formatting the darn thing, putting it out, getting reviews, getting blasted, learning. You have to learn to love this process. And this is the emotions you need to have. And then from this love, you will find joy in the process. I remember one thing that was really cool that I appreciated was Brandon Sanderson, when he was working to get his books published, he wrote 13 books before he got published. 13 books, guys. He wrote 13 books. People were saying, no, 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 no. And he just kept writing it. And he accepted. I remember speaking with him, and he told me that when he accepted and he was okay with the idea that he would write 100 books and no one would publish them, but he would just have to enjoy the process. And when he accepted that that very well could be his life, and that he was working in a hotel at the time, and he was a night manager, he accepted that if he was going to work as a night manager and write books at night and write 100 books and never be published, that he would be okay with that because he found enough joy in what he was doing. He said when he accepted that, and he accepted that he might not get published because he wasn't good enough, that's when he got his 7th book, Elantris, picked up. Like, it was like a crazy miracle, right? And then he actually went and gave it to the editor because they requested it, because he didn't have an agent at the time. But it was really cool. And then he got an agent later, pretty cool stuff. But that's what happens. What you need to have here is you need to fall in love with the process and recognize that it's not about what you get from it, it's about what you can give to it. And so mastering the love of your process is going to be key to then moving into this next phase of establishing a sense as a pro. And then after this, getting a sense of peace and freedom becomes the emotional journey. Really understanding what does it mean to be free, to be able to really truly create and write and invite other people into that, and not have things about fear. So when you're dipping down in these emotions, you're always doing it into a journey to bring yourself back out. And the idea is that when you're an established pro, you can now take this journey again and again and again, and you have an understanding of how to do that as a process. This is why you're a pro. This is why you're a professional. So as you're working through this stage, this is essentially your very first cycle, your very first feedback loop. But once you're an established pro, the elixir, you can now run this loop again and again and again and again at a higher rate of velocity, because you are at a higher frequency. So because you're at a higher frequency, you're able to run this journey of feeling like an aspirin all over again, because you're pushing yourself as an established pro. You're going through the idea that you suck at whatever journey and whatever story you're trying to tell, and then you're learning to love the process of telling that story, learning those characters, learning that environment, learning that setting. And then little by little, you begin to accelerate and grow and grow and grow. And then when you can find joy in that process, that's when you're an established pro. And then you move into the standard. I don't have too much experience with this, but I know to be at a standard level and be able to produce at a high level, they have to be able to love what they do and be able to work with a level of freedom, because that is what's created when you become the standard. A J.K. Rowling, a Stephen King, a Tom Clancy, a James Patterson, Brandon Sanderson. When you step into that level of professionalism, writing has now given you freedom. You are now able to truly do what you want and live the life you want because of the freedom. But it starts first in feeling the emotions and knowing what that feels. So if you're like, how do I shortcut this? What's the advice from all this? Now that I know all this stuff, how do I apply any of this? Now that you know what you need to feel through each stage, find where you're at and then simply feel the next emotion you need to feel. So if you're here as an aspirant in the community and you're like, I'm an aspirant, I don't know to do that, all you need to do is focus on finishing a project. And then from that project, I promise you, you might feel a sense of pride. You might feel like really, really good and be like, I'm so great. And then once you actually put it out there, if it's brilliant and everyone likes it, then I would say go, love the process, put it out there, get it out there. But you might find a lot of resistance and that not everybody likes it. And this is where you're going to start working through these difficult lower emotions. And that's where I'd say go to my other video if you want to learn what are the actual steps I need to move through it in terms of actions. But this is the emotions, because it's super important that you understand that your emotions precede your actions. And if you understand what level of emotion you're trying to process and what you need to feel, you will then know what your emotional reality needs to dictate in your next step. Because when you can overcome the emotions, taking the next step, whether it's finishing a project, seeking out a new community, or simply learning how to build demand and share vigorously your story that you're passionate about, that all comes naturally and easily when you're able to step into the emotional reality of what you need to do. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Like, subscribe, and if you need help with any of this, I'm doing free strategy sessions, completely free, no sales, no nothing. Comment down below and I'll come reach out to you. There's also a link down below in the description so you can sign up for on my wait list and get a time there so we can understand better how to serve you. I'm working to build a community of writers who are able to support each other and work through your isolated artists and be able to come out the very best version of yourself on the other end. Hope all is well. Stay happy, stay healthy. Peace.